And greetings. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand on BlazeTV radio and podcast. My name is Steve Deace. He's Todd Erzin. He is Aaron McIntyre. And we have a lot going on today's show for you. We'll continue our series on Theology Thursday on Dr. Tony Evans' outstanding book, which we think anyway, hopefully you agree, has over the course of this spring and summer just spawned some outstanding conversations as we've gone through it. We're on the penultimate chapter of the book. We got 2 discussions to go. Kingdom politics, returning God to government. We'll continue discussing that next hour. I know a lot of you, and I know I do, have polling questions. Well, I'm gonna let you listen in as I talk to a buddy of mine, Chris Wilson. He and I worked together on the Ted Cruz campaign. If you go back and look at a lot of the predictions I was making during those primaries, and a lot of people are like, man, you're like really accurate. Well, some of it is I'm a nerd, but a lot of it is I just kind of used his data. All right. And so I had a conversation with another buddy of mine who I've known even longer than Chris, who's a professional pollster. And him and I have actually been in the fight together at times here in Iowa. He's a pollster from outside our state. And I've been looking into the idea of putting my own poll together, an old school in-person poll, tightly screened, with open-ended questions to truly get an idea of where people are at. And he was telling me, you need to know, and he mentioned 2010 because that would have been the last cycle that him and I worked really closely together on what was happening in Iowa. He said, a lot's changed since 2010 when we did this in your state. Responses are hard to get. We have to pay a lot more to get people to make the amount of calls it takes. The call to response ratio is way worse than it's ever been. You have to call from a different number every day. Otherwise, if people see the same number more than once, they'll just view it as spam and not be. I mean, he's telling me how much more, like this could be $20,000, you know? And he's just running down how hard it would be to do an effective style of in-person poll compared to just a decade ago. And so, of course, you know where my mind is going. It's going to all these numbers we see constantly then. I mean, how do we really, how accurate is this process? So we're going to talk to Chris Wilson in the final segment of the show and get some of those answers, especially in light of last night's debate, last night's event. So that is coming your way as well. My daughter will be here later this hour for 3 non-political questions. I don't know if you guys saw the other day that Putin called the U.S. dollar's drop in dominance, quote, objective and irreversible. That was during the recent BRICS summit. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Those countries got together. They formally agreed to use their local currencies instead of the U.S. dollar. That could very well be the first shoe to fall as the demand for the dollar weakens, and therefore our buying power with our dollar weakens. That's why Birch Gold, they're busier than ever. Investors and savers are looking to harness the power of physical gold held in a tax-sheltered IRA. If you might be one of them, text Steve to 989-898 for your free info kit on gold. That's Steve to 989-898 for your free info kit on gold from Birch Gold, with thousands of happy customers, an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, and countless 5-star reviews. Count on Birch Gold to help you navigate transitioning an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. Text Steve to 989-898. Get that free info kit today by texting Steve to 989-898. And with that, let's get it started. Here's Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by the only moments that mattered from last night. The Fox News-produced second GOP primary debate was a fustercluck of epic proportions, filled with moderators asking questions about reality TV shows, parroting Kamala Harris talking points, and generally doing anything but moderating the debate. It wasn't until about the 15-minute mark that Ron DeSantis, who was center stage and polling better than anyone on the stage, got to talk. Everybody else had answered questions before he was given one. At the 25-minute mark, virtually everybody on stage had gotten to speak multiple times before, again, DeSantis was able to answer a question. During the latter portion of the debate, admittedly when everybody had probably already tuned out, we had some palmetto on palmetto, rhino on rhino crime.
You voted
he has
for
made sure that the borders are open
asked
and they
for a
haven't done
gas tax
anything. Look at
increase
everything
in South Carolina.
12 years. Where have you been? Where
I
have
voted
you
no
been,
on all.
Tim?
I voted on most of those things.
We've waited
I have voted
and nothing has happened.
Here's what you've
12
done.
years.
Here's the thing that I just find interesting.
Ron, let me finish
All
this.
these guys have said
Here's the
things,
fact.
and I appreciate a lot of the things they're saying.
Nikki
I'm
Haley.
the only one up here who's gotten in the big fights and has delivered big victories for the people of Florida, and that's what it's all about. You can always talk, but when it gets hot in there, when they're shooting arrows at you, are you going to be stand up for parents' rights, to keep the state free? Are you going to be able to do all those things? And in the state of Florida, because of our success, the Democratic Party lies in ruins. We have won the big fights. We have turned our state into a Republican state. People respond to leadership. I've done it while others have talked about it.
After the debate, Ron DeSantis challenged Donald Trump to a one-on-one debate with Sean Hannity.
And you know what? Maybe we can say, since the former president didn't come here, maybe he'd be willing to do one with you and I. I think he owes it to our voters to come and make the case.
You're now challenging it. So this is going to be Hannity one-on-one debate
Let's
central.
do it. Let's do it, right?
I'll do anything. I'll ask them.
Here's the thing, though. You owe it to the voters to come and make the case. No one's entitled to anything. You know, you can say, oh, some poll months before. No, you got to make the case. You got to owe it to the voters. So I'm going to show up everywhere. I think that's what we were able to do.
CNN held a focus group in Nevada, Iowa, after the debate.
I ask a show of hands now. Okay, I'm doing alphabetical order. Who you think did best during this debate? All of you. Burgum. 1. Christie. Okay, so his toughness didn't appeal to anybody tonight. DeSantis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Haley. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pence. Ramaswamy. 1. Scott. All right, so it looks like DeSantis, the winner in this room. Who do you think this was a bad night for?
Pence.
Pence.
And that's what happened while we were away.
All right, let's get to this. I think there are two storylines coming out of this debate. One of them we're going to discuss in the overtime today, because it requires, I think, its own conversation, and I want to make sure it gets the time that it deserves. And it involves what occurred last night with Vivek Ramaswamy. And I've said on this show that if it wasn't his very first Iowa event, it was one of them. It was very early in January. He asked me to come and MC an event he did at one of our venerable restaurants here in town, the Machine Shed, quintessential farm-to-food Iowa restaurant. It's an institution in our town. Every time, people come for the first time or meaty people come here and they ask me where to go to eat, that's always on my list of recommendations, And I went there that night and packed house and was just extremely impressed with his depth of knowledge of the issues and ability to tie them to a lot of the larger philosophical themes and challenges facing us as a culture. And then somewhere along the line, he just abandoned that and decided to kind of do his own little riff on Trump's act. And of course, the people that make money off of Trump's act all said that was great that he was doing that, and he would soar in the polls. His polling has completely collapsed everywhere and hasn't helped him at all. And we go into the last debate, in the first one in Milwaukee a month ago, and he spent the first hour coming out trying to do that and just got embarrassed. And the second hour of that debate, I thought he was really good. And you guys will recall, I said here on the Blaze at the time that I thought he was really good in the second hour. And by that point in time, the damage was done. And so his people are telling the media before last night's debate, I want to reintroduce himself. He's going to be the thoughtful new wave thinker again. And he tried to do that. And you saw right away, none of the other panelists would allow him to revert to that because of the way he behaved in the first debate. I think you're going to see a trend, and I think it's necessary, by the way, that is going to develop on the right in America. And it's happening now. And Vivek, I think, is caught now in that nexus, and we'll discuss that in the overtime today for Blaze TV subscribers at blazetv.com/Deace. That's blazetv.com/Deace. That's where you can go to become a Blaze TV subscriber, just $10 a month at blazetv.com/Deace, and that's where you'll be able to watch it later today. We'll record it right after today's show at blazetv.com/Deace. But the reason why that's going to go in the overtime, and we're going to spend the main time on the other issue, is because I think there's another clear theme coming out of this debate last night. The performance by Fox News, the production by Fox News was just utterly shameful. And it's just time to old Yeller Fox News. And if you remember in the book why they put old Yeller down, he defended the family. I think it was against a wolf attack. I've not read this book in 35 years. But I think it was like a wolf attacked the family or something. Doesn't he defend the family against like a wolf or something, right?
That sounds right.
And then he gets bitten so bad by the wolf now that he's got like rabies or something, right? And if they it's their venerable pet. But now he's sick. And so if they don't put him down, the sickness will go to his brain, and now he'll attack the family. So they have no choice but to put him down before that happens. You get the analogy I'm going with there? There was a time that Fox News was a very needed institution to push back against the wolves. And from the beginning of when Roger Ailes launched this channel, it always viewed itself as the gatekeeper of the American right. And so there was always an element of it that flummoxed movement conservatives or hardcore right-wingers like us because it behaved in that fashion. But it still put on, at times, very compelling content. Bill O'Reilly, in his prime, before the sex scandals and the accusations and whatever happened to him, where now he's claiming you can buy howitzers at gun shows and the Old Testament's metaphor. I mean, that was basically the last 3 to 5 years of the Bill O'Reilly show, scandals and WTF takes. But there was a time in the late 90s where, I mean, he was fighting... He was doing the shows that Tucker became famous for. He was fighting an in-depth culture war, and it was the most, at the time, highest-rated show ever in cable news. And then he kind of waned, and they got rid of him after all the scandals. And then Tucker comes in and actually even takes it to a different level than O'Reilly did. And then he becomes the highest-rated show in the history of cable news. And so there was a period of time, for all the frustrations with Fox, that it was a very needed tool. But the problem is now it's infected. That Marxist they put on the stage, you know it's bad when I think NBC hosting the next debate is an upgrade. If we're going to get 2 nights of questions from people that are going to ask them all from the left's premise, can we at least bring the professionals in? I mean, past Stuart Varney's bedtime, didn't have enough martinis. He can't even talk from the beginning. I don't know who this intern was at Univision. I mean, it was just dreadful. And then Dana pimping trans kids for Pride Month on Fox Perino. Could she have been more annoying? The whole thing was a disaster. And the RNC and Ronald Romney and Fox all ought to be ashamed of themselves. Fox has to be put down. It's at the point now that it's sick. It's sick to the point now it turns on its own family. It turns on its own people and attacks them. And you watched that last night. You get the reference? Mm-hmm. Makes sense now? You have to put it down. But here's the thing. There was still a game played last night. Let me give you a sports analogy. Let's say Trump is the number 1 seed in the playoffs. And so he has a bye. And last night was a playoff game to see who gets to go and play Trump. All right? Conditions may not have been good. Elements were bad. Windy conditions, raining. You know, Peyton Manning once won a Super Bowl throwing for 240 yards because it was the rainiest Super Bowl ever played. He couldn't just air it out to win that game. But do you remember that? Or do you remember that Peyton Manning won the Super Bowl against the Chicago Bears? That's all you remember. Right. You don't remember it was the rainiest game. In fact, you probably had to go and look that up after I just told that to you. So a lot of this industry is going to act as if what happened last night is irrelevant. That is not true. And I'm going to tell you why. Up here, where we've all been obsessed with this basically since the day after the 2022 midterm elections, is not how life proceeds down here, where some amalgamation of about 150 to 170,000 Iowans are going to trudge out of their homes in the middle of January here in 109 days and vote. For many of them, this process of full attention is just now beginning. Even the first debate was August 23rd. The Iowa State Fair had just ended. That was the first day kids were going back to school. Families were just getting into their normal routines. They're into their school year routines now. They're just now getting into this down here. Up here, and see, if you've been up here where we've been, then you remember like all these months of content that happened before, and you're acting as if that's relevant for this game. Well, yeah, they're in this team's in the playoffs, yeah, but they were struggling, they limped in, they weren't that good. They won this playoff game, so it doesn't matter what happened in March or April. And do people watch the playoffs or the regular season more?
Playoffs.
The playoffs. And therefore, if more people are watching the playoffs than the regular season, that means there's a lot of people watching the playoffs that didn't pay that much attention to the regular season. And all they know now is I tuned into a playoff game and this team won the game. They don't know that this team's success rate, win against replacement rate, expectancy win rate, they don't know what that was in October. They weren't watching, but they're watching now. And for those of us, though, that were into this and watching the whole time, we are watching it with an eye that, I just don't think that'll beat the number 1 seed next week. Because we're watching it all like this, like a concentric circle. Everyone else is just watching it as a singular event because they're just now paying attention. And here's the reality coming out of that event. If you're one of those people, and I think in Iowa there are many, who were completely and totally disconnected and largely not engaged, what you saw is there was one person on that stage who was clearly ready to lead the country. Now, whether that person's ready to beat Donald Trump is an entirely separate question, and that will be settled. They will eventually have to play, and that game, I think, should be coming pretty soon. And I'll talk about that in a second, too. But that wasn't the game being played last night, was it? The number 1 seed had a bye.
Yeah.
So they weren't playing last night. So you can only win the game that's in front of you. The week before, my favorite team went down to Columbus and won there for the first time in 22 years. They nearly lost at home to an Illinois team that ended the season losing 4 of its last 5 games. Maybe should have lost. And if you watched that game against Illinois the week before, did you think Michigan was going to go down and beat Ohio State on the road?
And certainly not the way it ended up doing it. No.
In fact, you knew, boy, if they play like that, if the game looks like that, you're not winning next week. But they weren't playing that game yet, were they? They were playing this game. And all they had to do was win this game. Because you win the game that's in front of you. And for a lot of people in Iowa, this was really the first game. And from a DeSantis standpoint, that couldn't have gone any better. 2 reasons why. You're the clear adult in the room. Now, how many people watched? We don't know yet. How many people stuck around for that poop show? We don't know that yet. But we do know, even if the numbers are way down, that'll still be the second most watched event by Republican primary voters, at worst, so far this cycle, at worst. And a lot more people watched that than what Trump was saying to people that weren't actually United Auto Workers in Michigan last night. You can only win the game that's in front of you. And the game that DeSantis is playing now is there's no other candidate to take on Trump other than me. I have to consolidate the non-Trump lane. And there were 2 candidates that Iowans took kind of an early fascination with and were interested in hearing more. Because Iowans are nice, and these 2 people are kind of nice, and so they fit the MO, and that's Tim Scott and Nikki Haley. And they looked anything but nice last night. All right? So what did I say yesterday? I told you that when I talked to DeSantis last week, I thought that this debate, the narrative had to be, you're clearly the most prepared to lead and go take on Trump from this debate. We can all debate how much that was proven. We can all debate how many people watched and how much it will be an impact. But if you watch that debate, that's the only narrative coming out of that debate, is it not, last night? Right. It's the only one. So that's a win. What will remain to be seen is how much of a win. We don't know. We don't know. But you won the game. He won the game and moves on to the next game. because he clearly was better than everybody else. And the two people that were the only real threats to drain anything from him in the non-Trump lane just nuked each other on the stage. Moving forward, I think what the DeSantis campaign should do is we're not talking about or talking to any of those candidates that were on the stage last night ever again. Even the next debate in Miami, if Trump's not there and I am, I'm not addressing any of them. They're not relevant. It is now time to take the fight to Donald Trump. And when I say that, I don't mean with trolling. I don't mean with name calling. I don't mean with debasing yourself. I mean with, to quote the great prophet Garth Brooks, it's time to call the old man out. The way that he did it on the life issue last night, I think that there's 5 weeks between now and the debate in Miami. The entirety of those 5 weeks by the DeSantis campaign should be confronting Donald Trump directly. But, and with swagger, but maturely on issues that matter. It is time for you to face the pro-life voters that you're blaming and betraying, Mr. President. It is time for you to face the homeowners who can't afford a home because of the trillions of dollars of new money that you printed with the CARES Act, Mr. President, that kind of stuff, and go right at him. It is now, in my mind, officially a two-person race, and that is how the DeSantis campaign should behave. Will it work? I don't know. Here's what I do know. When this is over, there is a far better chance, if it doesn't work, that Ron DeSantis will lament that he took too long to take the fight to Trump than that he did it too early. That I do know. If he's any kind of man anyway, that I know. You'll regret that you waited too long to do it, not that you did it too early. Now is the time. More people are paying attention. We're in between all these various indictments and everything else. Trump is opening up numerous fronts to go after him substantively on the issues. And it's time to see if the old man's lost his fastball. He just isn't who he used to be. Time comes from no man. I was watching Miguel Cabrera this morning on Twitter. Hit his 511th home run. He hit his 500th home run like 3 years ago. It's taken him this long to get to 511 because he's just been playing out the string. And he hit his 511th last night, one of his last home games ever at Comerica Park for the Tigers. 10 years ago, this is the guy winning Triple Crowns, right? One of the greatest right-handed hitters that ever lived. Now he's chugging around the bases, man, with a fold over the belly, okay? Time waits for no man. Father Time is undefeated. Everybody's number eventually gets called. Everybody eventually wears out their welcome. Everybody does. And it's time for the DeSantis campaign to challenge Trump on the grounds that that's now Father Time has now come for Trump. And he's tapping him on the shoulder. And that's what I think they should do for the next 5 weeks. Gentlemen, your thoughts.
What I love most about last night, and Aaron and I were talking about it a little bit before the show, is that debate held by Fox News, how it was held by Fox News, the people it made it impossible for objective greatness to happen by anybody. Honestly, the Gipper could have been up there for Ronald Reagan. Objective greatness was not going to happen. But something just as impressive happened. And this is why DeSantis is so damn good in general. He knows how to grind. In the hurricane, no excuses. We're going to build that bridge. There. He doesn't even speak for 20 minutes. He can get flustered by that. He can get off his game. He can be bitter. He can make excuses. He can say it wasn't ideal. If he becomes president, there's not a damn day of his life that is going to be ideal. But he understands that, and he's going to grind for you, and he's going to find a way to come out of that thing the victor. That's what you saw. Everybody else got thrown off their game, turned into a damn fool at various points. But Ron DeSantis that's his superpower. This isn't a show. He hates the show. That's why I went nuts 2-3 months ago over when I want more show from him. That's not him, and thank God it isn't. Because last night was designed to be the crappiest show ever. And still he said, I'm still going to win. And he did.
And I'm glad he didn't get flustered because I was so disgusted from what I saw from Fox News last night. We're parroting Kamala Harris talking points again. Okay, we're talking Dana Perino. She was sharing the stage with Hillary Clinton just like a couple weeks ago. Did you see that at some event, some function? It was just disgraceful. It was shameful. I was so disgusted by that. I wasn't really, I don't think, able to analyze things as I saw them coming in. But in hindsight, now that I'm kind of seeing how this thing shook out, it was very much a battle of attrition. And the only way you play that game, or the only way you win that game, is not to play. And Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump is not playing any game right now. Ron DeSantis decided, you know what, we're not going to get into the clown show game. And he was really the only adult in the room. And I'm glad now that we're upping our attacks. Even this morning on Fox News, I saw DeSantis is really upping his attacks and his calling out Donald Trump really at a manhood level to come out of his basement and actually be an adult and have a debate. That was good to see. But basically, I thought, you know, even if he didn't stick a lot of the landings, which he did last night on a lot of his answers, despite kind of being frozen out for basically the first half hour of the debate when most people are probably going to be watching, I thought he did a tremendous job in looking like the adult in the room. I just, some of these people up there, let's talk about Mike Pence for a little bit.
Ugh.
He is the
cringe master.
He is the nice Christian man. He's a man of faith. He follows the Billy Graham rule to a T. He is pious as the East is from the West. And then he used the Parkland tragedy to score a cheap hit. And he didn't really score, to try to score a cheap hit on DeSantis. And then Fox News cuts to break, not letting DeSantis respond. That's basically one of the microcosms of the fustercluck that was last night.
I counted at least 4 times Mike Pence thought he had some kind of an applause line or money line, and there was like no reaction.
Please clap.
At least 4 of them. I mean, he's the cringe master. He is the cringe master. And I have you have to understand, Nikki Haley and Tim Scott are from the same state. They came out of the same political genetics, gene pool. They shared the same consultants, and they got up there and acted like they were newbies, vying for a state legislative seat in a winner-take-all, and blew themselves up over some curtain rods story in the South Carolina governor's mansion that no one knows about or cares about. But see, that's why, as Chris Berman used to say, that's why we play the games. That's why. That's why we don't anoint NFL. We don't give the Lombardi Trophy and the national championship to who's winning power ratings. That's why we don't do that. That's why we go ahead and we let people vote. Well, at least used to. That's why we used to let people vote, despite what polls had to say. That's why we play the games. Who had on their bingo card that Trump would lift up his leg and whiz all over arguably his greatest achievement as president? Was that on your bingo card 2 weeks ago? Not on my bingo card.
Ignore it, but I didn't think he was going to whiz on it.
No, exactly. Was that on your? No. Who had on your bingo card before the event last night that Nikki Haley and Tim Scott would decide to have a cat fight? Over
about the gas tax.
Yeah, and about a bunch of provincial South Carolina state issues that no one knows anything about or remembers. Okay?
Curtains, anyone?
That was not on anybody's bingo card. All right? That's why we play the games. And yeah, frankly, a lot of times, those power ratings, the reason why you bet on them and invest on them is over the course of time, they tend to be more accurate than just doing this on, blind instinct and feel. That's why I'm a big data guy, because they do tend to be more accurate. But are they infallible? No. And when I say more accurate, what I mean is like 55, 60%. As opposed to just, playing heads or tails and flipping coins. Human nature is not a constant. It is a variable. And that's why we play the games. More in a moment. I don't know if you guys heard this yesterday, but I mentioned that we had to put the Eden Pure Thunderstorm air purifier to the test in our own home earlier this week. And Amy was trying to clean out one of the cleaning devices we have and accidentally dropped the part that had the bad water in it, and it went absolutely everywhere. And man, that stuff smelled terrible. I mean, it was bad. You know, thankfully it's nice out, you know, right now, so all the windows and stuff are open, so we try to air the place out. That didn't work. And she lights every candle in the house. That doesn't work. I'm like, I think I got just the device. And I forgot where we had ours at, and we kept it in the basement because that's where the sweaty teenage son hangs out. So ran down to the basement, grabbed our Eden Pure Thunderstorm purifier, plugged it in, and Amy went to Pilates. I went to the gym. An hour later, we come back. Smells totally gone. These things are incredible. It's why we have gotten so many positive reviews from you and our audience. It's why they've gotten thousands upon thousands of 5-star reviews online. And right now, you can save $200 on the 3-pack, which means you get all 3 for under $200 plus free shipping at EdenPureDeals.com with the discount code Steve. So we're talking cooking, cigarette smoke, litter boxes, trash cans, sweaty teenagers, that mildew smell in the basement that just won't go away. They're filterless, so you're never replacing those filters out of pocket or out of your own time. Again, you get all 3, so whole home protection for under $200 plus free shipping with the promo code Steve at EdenPureDeals.com. EdenPureDeals.com, discount code Steve. All right, it's time for 3 non-political questions.
We all have questions.
Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Who am I? A search and a question of identity. Why am I here? A question of meaning and purpose. Where am I going? Question of destiny.
Some better than others.
What sort of morality or proto-morality would you expect to find in a chimpanzee troop?
Injecting some levity into the demise of Western civilization. It's 3 questions on the Steve Deace Show.
Indeed, it is that time again. Time for 3 questions of a non-political variety. And for that, we hand it over to a wise, pregnant mom. My oldest daughter, Anastasia. How are you, sweetheart?
I'm tired.
You look tired.
The debate wasn't even that late at night, but since I've found out that I was pregnant, I go to bed at 8:30 p.m. I'm out by 8:45. So I kind of felt like an old person. Honestly, when I was watching the debate, I could barely keep my eyes open. I was just like, and not just because I was tired.
I was going to say, I'm not entirely sure your condition was the leading, if not only reason for why you were having a hard time stay awake. And, your mom was like, I'm trying to fall asleep. I can't even fall asleep because the screaming over each other was so loud. She tried to fall asleep during the debate and couldn't do it. All right, so what are the questions you've got for us this week?
Okay, my first question for you guys is, if you were to wake up in 2020 in the middle of COVID, what would you do differently?
What would I do differently?
So this is if you were to wake up and knowing what you know now,
okay,
what would you do differently?
Okay.
So I can clarify that.
Knowing what I know now?
Yes.
Okay. Because before you mentioned that, I'm like, I don't know, man. I took a lot of risks the first time. Yeah. I mean, I kind of let it ride the first time around. But knowing what I know now, I would have monitored the vaccine more closely from the very beginning. And if you go back to when they started rolling out in January of 2021, we still had a lot of places in this country where schools weren't open yet, cities weren't open yet, lives weren't back to normal. You couldn't go. Breathing was still criminalized in many places you went, and we were under constant threats of being banned for anything at the time, everywhere. Mm-hmm. And there was really no data. They didn't give us a lot of their trial data. Remember, that's why Aaron Siri and the Del Bigtree people had to sue to get the true Pfizer trial data that they were going to hold back from us for, what was it, 70 years or something, Todd?
Mm-hmm.
Is how long?
Yes.
2055 or 75 or something crazy. And so I just didn't have the data that gave me freedom to push back on it without risking throwing all the other work we were doing to censorship and being banned. And just decided to let that process play itself out and see what we'd get the results in real time when people started taking the vaccine, and we would just see in real time. But knowing what I know now, we suspected the interconnectedness between the vaccine and the origin of the virus, but we didn't really know. And we left a lot of those breadcrumbs in Fauci and Bargan when that book came out in March of 2021, but there still wasn't enough yet to connect the dots. I would have been more vigilant about pushing back on the vaccines from the very beginning, knowing what I know now, rather than letting that kind of play out for about 6 months before I seriously started to look at it in the summer of 21. Todd, what about you?
Steve's calculus about, it's his show. He's the captain of the Enterprise, worried about things from a demonetization, not only on his behalf and thus all of his employees, but also on the Blaze.
Yeah.
I only have to care about that insofar as, he lays out the lay of the land, and then I work for him. So yeah, but I wouldn't change a thing, because either what I said. Or how I led my family, because I was the anti-vaxxer. I mean, I knew this was coming, and if you remember, right? I mean, my father died. I came back. I was back for a week when things were starting to close down, and I told you early on in March 2020, and I said, if we had to get a pandemic, we won the lottery. It's not coming after our children like thieves in the night. It goes after old and sick people. That's sad, but life goes after old and sick people. And I said, if we would do absolutely nothing, I said back then, I promise you, we would end up better than where we're going to end up. And I was right about that too. And like I said, I'm not particularly smart about that. I'm lucky that I married the way I did, and there was a learning curve that I was privy to. So I wouldn't change a thing, and there's not a damn thing I was wrong about. Well, I was wrong about one thing. I couldn't have done anything more. And to the point about the debate yesterday, they proved it. They didn't even bring up precedents. What we could have done, nobody cares anyways. But I did not know that I didn't know what ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine were. But as much as I knew that the big pharma lied, and I told you, and that's why I was an anti-vaxxer, I did not know how brazen they would be in burying things like that worked. Now, I don't know what I could have said otherwise. There's doctors that tried and did nothing. So I don't look back with any guilt. I tried to say everything I possibly could.
Knowing what we know now, that is the operative phrase here. I would have put something in every single montage about the dangers of mail-in voting and what we were headed for with that phenomenon. That's what I would have done, because that's the secondary or tertiary impact of COVID, and it had disastrous ramifications.
Oh, we tried with that too, steaming piles of ash, and the Wisconsin vote, and kept waiting for it. So. You both, I know you tried on every front that you could.
Good question.
Second question. If you could know one thing about the future other than who's going to win the election, what would you choose and why?
I'm hesitating because I think my answer is sacrilegious.
I love that precursor.
Yeah. When does the Lord return is the obvious answer to your question. But I'm concerned that it's sacrilegious to desire to know that. Because what would be your motivation in wanting to know? So you can plan your own life accordingly when the Lord said to live every day as if today could be the day. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, it feels sacrilegious to want to know the answer to that.
Yeah, you'd get Jesus juked by Jesus himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Answering that question.
Yeah. Get a divine stiff arm. Yeah, that probably hurts. But is it sacrilegious to want to know that? Should we just take that off the table?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'd want to know where America is when I'm 70, 20 years from now. Because I probably got about 20 years at my current health, workout level, pace. I can probably keep this pace up another 15, maybe 20 years. Because I'd want to know, which existential stakes are we playing for? Are we living in an end times level event, or are we just watching the artists once known as Western civilization teetering on the brink of the ash heap of history? Because that would factor in for me the strategy that I would deploy on behalf of you and Zoe and Noah and Autumn and the other little ones that you guys have to come after I'm gone, to use the platforms and abilities and mechanisms that God has given me to their fullest potential, so that when I hand you guys the baton, I've done everything I could to set you up to be successful, given where we're going. That's my answer.
Gosh, I'll be 42 in 20 years. That is old, isn't it?
And you're fired. Todd, go ahead.
I was going to say, when's the last show that we do? I think that would probably say a lot about a lot of things, just even knowing that date. I mean, do we do this for 5 years? Do we do this for 15 more years?
I think for me,
6 more months,
6 more hours,
an hour and 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there may be a time where we cannot fight. Now, in the sense of North Korea style, you are just under utter subjugation, and knowing when that point is, and knowing where my family's refuge of last resort could be, whether that means we need to live out in the wilderness somewhere, or Hungary, or Africa, because the trend lines that we're on, we are going down the tubes real quick for people who believe like those of you listening and myself. So, again, that's not I hate that because it's a defensive and it's a retreat type of answer. But sometimes you got to flee to the Alps, a la Sound of Music. Sometimes you do have to flee. So that's what I would want to know.
Okay, third question.
Okay, and then last question.
These are some heavy questions this week, man. You can tell you're about to have a kid. Like, everything's existential right now.
I'm also, since I'm tired, I'm grumpy, so I feel like I'm more like you today now because I'm serious.
So we said there were 3 non-political questions. We didn't say they were going to be 3 non-cosmic questions, right? And then her final question is, what are you? Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yes.
It's fun. Well, my last question for you, and since we're running short on time, we'll do, say this in like 3 sentences or less.
Okay.
So this is going to be hard. What do you think is the biggest problem with the youth today, and how do we fix it? These really are deep questions. These are not silly like normal.
A lack of understanding of truth, a disinterest in even pursuing truth, and therefore a void of critical thinking and discerning truth. How's that?
Good.
That'll work?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't solve the how do we fix it part.
Oh. Well,
it just kind of is more like, here's the tea.
The gospel. That's the only fix.
The problem is always comfort over consequences. Always. And how do we fix it? Well, I'm going to quote the great prophet Amy What's-Her-Face, who said, posted that video of the transgender boy beating up a girl in a hallway, and everybody just saying, watching, she just said, we need some old-fashioned bullying. Where's the football team to take care of this? She gets it. What's your excuse?
Ultimately, it's the same for the younger generation as it is for every generation. You're either going to choose Christ or chaos. You're either going to choose despair or salvation. And I think that's what I see in the younger generation, including mine, millennials and Gen Zers. There's a pervasive sense of nihilism that's fed into, and it's coddled by so many things in our society right now. Number one, I think, is this. I think we have a faux sense of connection, and we are more disconnected than ever before. We were made for community, and we are not in that right now. And I would just echo what Steve said and kind of what I just said as well. It's Christ or chaos. The gospel is able to take on this and whatever comes out of this. The gospel is not unfit to take on whatever new technological marvels, whatever new novel sin that pervades throughout society, throughout generations. We just got to let the lion out of its cage.
Well said. I thought this is going to be kind of a heavy show today after the debate and everything, and so it'll be good to do 3 non-political questions early and come in and lighten things up. And no, this is just we're throwing high heat for the full 2 hours here today. So well done. I appreciated that.
You're welcome. I almost came on was like, which one do you guys like more, Donald Duck or Ron DeSanctimonious? But I was more serious.
Did you guys see they rolled out DeSantis? Straight up, man, Ron should change his name to that. I mean, DeSantis, that sounds like
Is this the real life? Is this DeSantis?
Yes. Life is just DeSantis. Yeah. I mean, I thought that was like, I wish somebody would call me DeSantis. That's a great nickname. But yes, no. These were good questions. Thank you, sweetheart. All right. When we come back, we've got Theology Thursday, as we are nearing the finish line of our study of Dr. Tony Evans' book, Kingdom Politics. Pollster Chris Wilson's going to join us at the bottom of the hour, and we're going to get into some of the fundamentals of polling more than actual, current results. I think a lot of us have questions about the state of the overall industry, don't you think? Given the mercurial performance. In 2016, everything was way off. In 2018, everything was pretty accurate. 2020, everything was way off. In 2022, everything was accurate. Why is primary polling so much more inaccurate, just as a general rule? Why is it so difficult? Some of those fundamentals from one of the best I've ever encountered. And so he'll join us here at the bottom of next hour. That and more coming your way in a moment right here on The Blaze. Stay tuned. And greetings, back with Hour 2, live and on demand here on Blaze TV. Radio and podcast, but in increasingly less demand. Nevertheless, we'll continue on. That's why when you said last hour, Todd, I'd kind of want to know when our last show is going to be. I'm not anxious to ask that question because I think the clock could be ticking here, given the amount of buttons we're pushing on a regular basis now. Or at least that's what I'm told. I mean, I'm reliably informed that you can't make a living in this business without slurping whoever the perceived brand face of the brand at the moment is.
Let's find out.
I mean, I didn't slurp McCain. I didn't slurp Romney. I'm still here. One of those guys is dead. The other one's retiring. So I don't know. Maybe that's not true.
I don't know. What made me think of it is the whole interview last night about Tucker, and you mentioned it earlier, Tucker and O'Reilly, and they didn't know when their last day was coming. Yeah. So I was just kind of curious.
All right, let us know what you think about what we think and when you think our last day is coming. Steve at stevedeace.com is how you can email the show. Like us on Facebook, MeWe and Gab. You can follow me at Steve Deace Show on Twitter, Getter, Instagram, and over on TikTok. And then you can find me on Truth Social at Real Steve Deace as well. If you're a podcast listener, we appreciate you so very much. We would ask if you would show further appreciation for us if you like the show. Give us a 5-star review, hit subscribe, or if you're on iTunes, follow. And that'll make sure that every new episode that we do shows up in your feed every day that we do one. And thanks to all of you that have done either or both of those things for us previously. We do appreciate you. Thank you. And we also appreciate our friends over at Preborn. And we hope one day it won't be necessary to talk about them anymore, because we have finally vanquished this scourge on our civilization of ritualistic child sacrifice. Unfortunately, today's not yet that day. Thankfully, though, we have outstanding ministries like Preborn that are on the ground ready for the battle. And they understand that the battle requires two weapons, truth and grace. First, mothers in crisis must be confronted with the truth that it is not your body. That's another heartbeat. That's another body. That is somebody else. And so over the years, they have found about 80% of the time when a mom hears that heartbeat in that ultrasound, her conscience is convicted and she can't go through with murdering her child. And that's the good news. And here's the even better news. You know that ultrasound only costs $28. Would you spend $28 today for an 80% chance of saving a life? I think that you would. But they also know now that this is now that the truth has had its day, grace now has to confirm that truth. Because let's face it, if you're a mom and if you're pregnant, if you're in a secure relationship that you're comfortable in, you're 99.9999% odds you're not looking to have an abortion. It's the women who are sadly not in those situations that are looking to do it. And so they need help. The mom needs love and care too. And so she needs postnatal care. They provide all of that free of charge as well, provided they've got tax-deductible donations from people like us. So go to preborn.com/Steve to make one of those donations, please. Preborn.com/Steve, or you can dial #250 on your mobile phone with the keyword baby, or just simply go to preborn.com/Steve. We have 2 chapters left. We have been spending the last few months looking at Kingdom Politics, Returning God to Government by Dr. Tony Evans. The penultimate chapter, next week we'll get into the conclusion. The penultimate chapter, The Functioning of Kingdom Citizens. Gentlemen, I'm going to start us off and then hand it to you.
Okay.
And I want to start it off with the very first sentence of this chapter. Christians are now the visiting team in our culture. Let me say that again. Christians are now the visiting team in our culture. Now, the first thing I want to do before I define what this sentence means is I want to define the very first term of this sentence. Christians. Because we still live in a culture, when we were kids, Todd was like 87%. Now it's like 75% or 70% of Americans identify as Christians, but they're not. Let's identify what this term means. We don't mean that your Facebook feed is full of you ogling scantily clad women, or you're some chain-smoking, F-bomb dropping grandmother, but you put an avatar of Jesus with his hand on the shoulder of your idolistic favorite politician once, and you're now a Christian. That's not what we mean, okay? We're talking spirit-filled people walking a narrow road, strangers in a strange land, that are running the race with the desire to persevere to finishing it. Is that a fair definition for the sake of this conversation?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
That's the group we're talking about. And I think that's the group that Dr. Evans is talking about. If you count yourself in that group, this is who he's talking to. You, Dr. Evans says, are now the visiting team in our culture. This is his way of saying what we say on this show. We now live in a post-Christian culture. And typically in a sporting event, no one ever says road team advantage. No one ever says that, right? No, there's no such thing as a road team advantage. No one, if you do power ratings, if you wager on sports, no one gives points to the road team as an inherent advantage, no matter how good the team is. No matter how good Alabama's ever been under Nick Saban, they've never played a road game where they got an extra couple, 2-3 points in the line because they were playing on the road. That's not how this works. So what he is saying now is you are at a disadvantage. You have no benefit of the doubt in this culture anymore. Let me draw another analogy to drive this point home for those of you that aren't sports fans. Up until this generation, here is how the relationship between Christianity and America operated. Christians sat in the jury box at the trial. And the two sides of an issue, any issue in any era, slavery, temperance, women's suffrage, westward expansion, whether to declare war, industrialization, suburbanization, civil rights. Pick any signature issues and movements and moments throughout the bedrock of American history, and how it worked is the church sat in the jury box. And then the two sides of that issue, they were the plaintiffs or the defendants, depending on how you viewed the case. One side could be a plaintiff, the other the defendant, and then they could actually just be opposite, depending on your perspective of who's prosecuting and who's defending. But then both sides of an issue were expected to present their evidence to the jury. And then the jury would render a verdict on which way the culture is going to go on this. That's not how it works anymore. How it works now is a secular culture sits in the jury now. A biblically ignorant culture sits in the jury now. And Christians are now, by the definition that we just articulated a few minutes ago, Christians are now no longer in the jury box. You're one of the legal representatives. You're either the plaintiff or the defendant. And we've got to make our case. That means we're not the default setting. If you're sitting in the jury box, you're the default setting in applying the law. In that case, right? You've been selected to do that. We're not that anymore. We now have to actually make our case issue by issue, controversy by controversy. There are no more built-in biblical assumptions in this culture any longer. None. Not a single one. Nowhere. Everything is up for grabs. And I think that's a very important part to understand. And I think this is something that, and I would too, I think this is something the older generation is having a hard time accepting. And so they're making a lot of desperate cultural decisions and a lot of, I've got one last chance at this. I've got to do something now. Panicky compromises. And they think they're the Jacob here, but they're really the Esau. They won't accept the reality that I just articulated. This is a post-Christian country. You are not trying to preserve a republic. You're trying to restore one. You're not trying to save a civilization. You're trying to resurrect one. And I think as a generation, they're having a hard time accepting this. And so they're making a lot of this moment, instantaneous compromises in the cultural and political arena to try to take back as much ground as they possibly can now. But that's a vain effort. No matter how well-intentioned it is, no matter how hardworking it is, it's a vain effort because we don't have first things established any longer, and they have to be reestablished. And in fact, if I could use another sports analogy, this is what my Detroit Lions did for 60 years. Desperate. Just trying stuff. Hey, let's draft this Barry Sanders guy. Let's see what happens. No plan. They built no team really around him. Let's just draft this Stafford guy. Let him throw it 50 times. See if it works. No plan, no structure, no fundamentals. Now they're actually executing a plan. May not turn out to be the right one, but they understand that you have to establish a foundation first. And the older generation here on its way out the door, it's seen all of these foundations erode in its time, and it's now desperately trying to act without those foundations. So that it's okay if our guy lies and gaslights and name calls, because we have to do whatever it takes to win. The problem is if you're injecting more of that postmodern, pagan, truthless venom into the culture, you're not winning. You're just going to leave the next generation with even more of that, to the point that now it infects your own side. And then we just start lying and gaslighting each other. And so the truth is lost. You know who wants the truth to be lost? The enemy. And he doesn't really care how it's lost or who loses it for him. He just wants it lost. I know everything right now says we have to make every compromise possible to do whatever it takes possible right now. That's actually how we got here. We did this for a generation. We never put first things first. We never went back to the fundamentals. We never said, like Vince Lombardi, men, this is a football. Got to rebuild this thing all over again. And what Dr. Evans is saying now is understand the signs of the times. That's the era we're in. And it doesn't matter how much Fox News you watch. It's the truth. We're in that era. And we're not going to get out of it easily. We have to rebuild the wall. We're in Nehemiah mode. Gentlemen, your thoughts on this chapter, or what I just said for that matter.
Damn you, Steve. You made several analogies that I was just going to make and drew some conclusions that I was just going to draw.
I'm sorry.
But no, there's actually one point of this that I think needs to be honed in on quite a little bit. I was going to hone in on, I was going to make the analogy of the football analogy that Dr. Evans just made. You know, when we talk about Christians, the church in this society, are we called to go on offense as Christians? Well, is the gospel offensive? Yes, it is. It is offensive. So are we called to go on offense as Christians when it comes to the gospel, when it comes to building God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven? I believe the answer to that is yes. Unfortunately, the offense that we throw out there is basically the Iowa Hawkeyes offense.
Yep.
15 years ago, Iowa, they would not win every game against national brands, but you darn well had to respect them. They wouldn't get blown out. And they would win a few games here or there. Now, they have failed to adapt, and that's the part I want to hone in on, and I'll do that in a few moments. They have failed to adapt. They still win games, but when it comes to the big brands, the national titles, are you relevant, Iowa? Whether it's Michigan in the Big Ten championship game, Michigan last year, Ohio State last year, Penn State on Saturday, they just get blown out because nobody respects them anymore. The defense knows exactly what's coming. They're loading the box. Iowa doesn't just get to ask them, hey, don't bring 9 players into the box, please. Please respect us. No. It's the same way the culture views us now. We are in enemy territory. They know the plays that we're going to run because they've seen this before, and they've seen us fail to adapt. Now, when I talked about, this is the part I want to hone in on, and I think it's really important to hone in on. When I talk about adapting, I don't just mean bringing fresh blood in there, fresh faces, the fill-in-the-blank suburban megachurch way. We've tried all that. That also fails. Iowa's tried that. They brought in a bunch of really good players from the transfer portal, and it's the same mess this year. What I'm talking about in failing to adapt is kind of what you hit on, Steve. We are utterly resistant to recognizing that we are now foreigners. We are strangers in a strange land. We are trying to make arguments and make premises that our enemies do not respect and have rejected. What I mean about adapting is understanding that we are now insurgents. What failing to adapt and seeing things and operating as if we are still the majority in a culture in which we are not, is that we are trying to, the effect that it has is that we end up watering down everything that we believe in or say that we believe in. Because XYZ, we got to win this election. We've got to maintain a seat at the table. And so, yeah, we got to water things down because we're still operating under the premise that things are what they were 50 years ago, and that's not true. What it means to be an insurgent, actually, is the opposite. You need to be more bold. You need to be more unashamed of the gospel. You need to double and triple and quadruple down on those things that are good, true, and beautiful. Kirk Ferentz and Iowa's offense, whether it's because it's pride, ego, arrogance, or just plain nepotism, they are afraid to change. I don't know why. I don't know. I think we're afraid to change as well. The adaptation to playing on the enemy's field, playing as the away team, playing as insurgents, is not to water down. It's to get more bold with the gospel, more bold with our actions, more bold in carrying out a biblical worldview where you live first in your families and then in your localities. And that's just something that the American church has failed to do for one reason or another. We're trying to hold on to relics of the past and operate as if it's 50 years ago, or we're moving to something new and we're just doing window dressing for window dressing's sake.
The silent majority rides again.
Neither of those things works.
Yeah.
It's effectively the same outcome. More boldness is needed.
Todd, I just got this note. Well said, Aaron. I just got this note from a Jim Paul who says, forget the culture. Christians are now the visiting team in our own churches.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Yikes. Anyway, that's a good segue to you probably.
You're both white. So how do you wake people up to that reality? People who don't want to be woken up to it, who don't want it. I mean, my goodness. Pastor Tony here, he's parroting us. Y'all way too comfortable. He makes that. Well, how does he go about doing it at the end of this chapter? Yeah. Nazi and Hitler analogies. That's what I'm talking about. Remember back in the day, he used to say, oh, no, that's over the top. No, the problem was making Nazi and Hitler analogies badly and lazily. Yeah, that's bad. But sometimes they're the only way to go. Like right now, to do what Aaron and Steve are talking about. I mean, my goodness. He talks about Nazi Germany. What happened? Why the others looked away? They were too comfortable. In fact, stories are told of trains full of Jewish people being sent off to concentration camps, having to pass by churches full of people. When the trains would get closer to the churches, the people inside would sing louder so as not to hear the moans and groans of those being taken away to their death. And he says, that's too many Christians today. And what does he say? Too many Christians are turning up the sports channels or the political pundits or entertainment so that they can't hear the moans and groans. Told you. What have I been trying to tell you? Then he goes on. About Christian influence. We need to show up at the PTA meetings, become more involved in education of our children. We need to attend the city council meetings and hear about what is happening.
These themes feel familiar.
Yes, they are. Because, we've been at this for thousands and thousands of years. Everybody wants, even authentic Christians, and not having Christians in the church, as you just got done talking. Here, folks, Steve mentions many times, and this is not something Dr. Tony talks about, but Steve, what does mercy triumph over?
Judgment.
But you also said, does that mean judgment isn't important?
But it doesn't cancel the judgment.
Yeah. If you don't understand the judgment, the mercy doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
Judgment is justice.
What do you need the mercy from?
Yes.
The judgment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Tony talks about we need to go to these meetings because right now what's going on there is unjust. We need to bring back justice. And my point is, we cannot have the mercy without it. We can't short circuit it. He talks about a fifth column there and basically the reverse of the march through the institutions. We need to do that. That's long term. But in the meantime, we have to reestablish what true justice is. That's why this lawfare isn't just lowering us down to their levels. There's always going to be justice. I think the story of Abraham sacrificing his son is ultimately about that. People think it's about a lot of people think, testing his obedience, the ultimate obedience of Abraham. I don't think that's fundamentally what that's about. God did not create animal sacrifice of any kind. If you remember, Abraham believed in God, but it was very polytheistic. He still thought there were many gods. This is my God. This is a powerful God. I acknowledge this God. But he had not been broken he had not been totally bending the knee at, I am the Lord your God. You have no other gods before me. There are none. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Totally. So what was that about, sacrificing his son? There's going to be even the pagans understood, there's going to be some kind of justice. Most, including Abraham, just believed something like that. So you're going to sacrifice your son so he can be totally obedient? No, Abraham didn't know any other way. I just have to obey to what the justice is. And then in that lesson where he had to sacrifice his son, God stops him and says, now that we've taken justice all the way to its logical conclusion, now you can understand what only you can understand. Everybody can understand justice without me on some level. What you can't understand is mercy. And now I'm going to save you from killing your son, because the only person that can kill their son to bring about true justice in the universe is me, the Lord thy God. And my son will ultimately pay that price down the road. That's what that is about. It is about the character of God. It is not about the obedience of Abraham. And so bringing that right back here, we need to show up to these meetings, and we need to make these evildoers pay. We can't just say, can't we get along? Mistakes were made. They must pay. They must know what justice is, that they were wrong to do this. And then, and only then, can forgiveness make sense. We have totally bastardized this process as Christians. That's what you mean. That guy means. You're really just going to say, well, turn the other cheek on. We learned the whole eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That wasn't brutality. What that was is proportional justice.
Yes.
We don't understand proportion. It also didn't mean do nothing. People that we are deeply overcome by sin in this day and age, and people must pay for it. God believes that. We won't. All of us in our comfort right now, we are duty bound to bring justice back. And if we bring justice back, then we can have God's mercy. It is impossible. Impossible. That cross is justice, but it is also mercy. This is not a Hallmark card, people. We must do better on this front. We have just become a joke. We are letting our children be preyed on by disgusting perverts. And look at what Fox News does. Somehow it thinks it can dance away because nobody believes in justice anymore. COVID, the jab, poisoning, nobody believes in justice.
In fact, Fox News last night asked a question from the debate. What will you do about discrimination and injustices against the rainbow jihad that you were just describing? That was the premise of the question that Fox News asked last night.
You can't have what you want. You can't have peace on earth unless you bring back justice first. That is God's way.
Brother, that'll preach right there. I mean, I don't even know where to go. I mean, I don't even know where to go after that. Like, I feel anything I would say would sully that.
But I'm Catholic, so it probably doesn't count. I'll get that.
You know, everyone deals with pain from time to time. Chronic or clinical. If it's clinical, make sure you get proper medical attention. But if it's chronic, that's probably because of too much inflammation in the body, and that is leading you to that achiness, soreness, that lingering pain that just won't go away. And that's where our friends at Relief Factor come in. It's the drug-free, anti-inflammatory, though it was created by physicians who can prescribe drugs. And hey, not every time is there going to be a drug-free solution. That's why be thankful for things like antibiotics such as penicillin and the like. But if you can treat something naturally, so therefore you don't risk anything, any side effects or taxing other systems or organs in the body, by all means take advantage of it. We're about 70% confident that Relief Factor is that drug-free solution for you. Why 70%? Because about 70% of the people who try the 3-week quick start that costs you only $20, they see such great results in just those first 3 weeks that they end up sticking around long term with the product. So if you don't see those kinds of results in 3 weeks or less, just go to relieffactor.com. Again, just $20 to see if this is the solution you've been waiting for. Relieffactor.com, or you can call them at 800-4-RELIEF. That's 800-4-RELIEF, or relieffactor.com. We could do an entire show on the themes you just touched on. And how our unwillingness to understand these things, that we have conflated condemnation with consequences, right? Paul is very clear. There is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, meaning you are not eternally condemned now to be separated from the grace of God. But he doesn't say that you're free of any consequences. I mean, you still face consequences under the common grace, natural law of God. God is not going to say, hey, you got drunk and ran somebody over, so you shouldn't go to prison because you're no longer condemned. You may not be eternally condemned, but absolutely there should be consequences for those actions. And we've conflated those two things and acted as if all consequences are some form of condemnation. Therefore, there's almost no consequences at all for anything.
How can you possibly understand mercy or forgiveness if there's no consequence? How?
Right. Why would you need it?
Same thing.
Why would you seek it out?
Lying. There's no consequences for lying. Why wouldn't you do it if it profits you?
Right.
It's the same thing.
Right. Just very well said, and much needed to be said. We'll come back. See if we can get some answers on the state of American polling from Chris Wilson, one of the best pollsters I've ever known. Next. Summer's coming back. Getting into the 90s this weekend. Saw a kickoff from Michigan, Nebraska. Temps could be as high as 96 for that game. So, still time to stock up on Sweat Block, folks. And even if it's not just heat, maybe for you the adrenaline gets going and you can pit really easily and you don't want that to happen. You're going to make a public appearance. It's a first date. It's a job interview. Want to make sure you look and feel your best. Block out that excess sweating. Keyword there, excess. Block out that excess sweating with our friends over at Sweat Block. Their antiperspirant wipes will help you with the pitting process. Their deodorant stick absolutely will bring the dryness you're looking for. I love the deodorant lotions as well. Just a lot of fantastic products, and right now you can get them all for 20% off with my last name, Deace, as your promo code when you go to sweatblock.com. Again, go to sweatblock.com, use the promo code Deace for 20% off. 20% off with the promo code Deace at sweatblock.com. So if you have been following polling in recent years, like me, you have questions, and a lot of them. All right, so let's go to a man that I think may have for us some answers. One of the best I know. Worked with him on a campaign once, in fact. Chris Wilson is here. Noted pollster extraordinaire. Good to see you, Chris. It's been a few months. Brother, how you been?
Yeah, good, Steve. Good to see you. I thought when you started talking about football, you were going to talk about the fact that your Cyclones are playing my Sooners this weekend. So maybe we should talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, that'll be a quick bit. Although I might look at those 20 points with the whole look-ahead factor I would imagine y'all are much more interested in next week's game. You got some vengeance possibly to extract after what happened last year. But
well, you know, the beauty of it is after they shipped Alex Grinch off to USC, we now have a defense again. So
yeah,
it's
they're
nice
tackling
to
again.
watch us make. Yeah, we know how to make a tackle and not just let somebody run for a touchdown every time they touch the ball. It's an amazing concept.
It is
football, and like USC would be the one without the defense now.
Indeed,
it's fun to watch.
Indeed. All right, on polling. I really don't. If we have time, I might get into some of this particular campaign data. But what I really want to do is educate our audience on the state of the industry in and of itself, Chris. And one of the reasons why I said to Todd, we got to get you on, is I'm thinking about doing some polling on my own here in Iowa, where I can construct the questions open-ended, old school, in person only. Okay, so I went to a guy that I've worked with before in state races across Iowa, who knows our state well, and to see if we could do that kind of poll. And brother, he gave me he said, yeah, here's 10 reasons why it's going to be a lot harder than it ever was before, and it's going to be way more expensive than it ever was before. Like, he's telling me this is going to be like $20,000 probably to pull off what you want to do. We're going to have to hire people to work overtime. The call to response ratio is the lowest it's ever been, ever. And you know, him and I worked a lot together in the 2010 election cycle here in the state, and he kept telling me a lot has changed since 2010. And that just got my gears grinding about, okay, well then how reliable is this on a corporate level systemically everywhere? Because a few months ago, Chris, I had a very well-known media figure that works for a renowned corporate media institution and publication. And he came into my studio after the show one day, and we both agreed we're not going to lie to each other. It's going to be totally off the record. Here's what I hear from my side. Here's what you hear from your side. We're just going to exchange intel. And Chris, one of the things he said to me, he goes, polling drives so much of our coverage, yet, and it's the most expensive thing we do, but we have no clue how reliable it is whatsoever. It just blew my mind that he just said this out loud. So let's start there. How reliable is your industry? How hard is it to truly get a hold of people? How much should people truly trust what they see whatsoever?
Yeah, those are three very different questions. And I think you've got to understand that there are different types of polling. And for instance, let's take what I do. And since you just went through the full shot of me, you can see that right now I'm sitting in the headquarters of the Ron DeSantis Never Back Down supporting Super PAC. And I can tell you that I have the utmost confidence in the numbers that I put out on behalf of what we are doing here. Now, there is $20,000 actually sounds pretty inexpensive for what it costs to do a good survey these days. So I point that out in that, and there's some reasons for that. So the first part is, how accurate is it? I believe that internal surveys done for campaigns and candidates by firms that are utilizing predictive modeling for the purposes of sampling are the absolute gold standard. But those are incredibly expensive. So let's start up there. Now, then you've got the other end of it. Somebody sent me a poll done in your state not too long ago that had Trump over 50, DeSantis down around 10. And I just took a quick look at it and said, this is all done by IVR and text messaging. That would be the other end of the spectrum, whatever the opposite of the gold standard is. Let's call it the clay standard. And so that's going to be I would not take those seriously at all. And that's what you see, unfortunately, most media polls going to, just because as I mentioned, the way in which we do it is pretty expensive. So how difficult is it to get people on the phone? It's incredibly difficult. And we do a lot of different manners to get people on the phone. And I can go into that, but we'll text people, set up times to call, things like that. But the thing that is, it makes it, I can't do a survey in a state rep or a state senate district anymore. It's impossible. You can't get enough interviews.
Wow.
I can still do a congressional district, but that's becoming more and more difficult. I can certainly do a Senate, governor. I can do statewide in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, to give you a hint of some of the things I'm doing now. But all of that begins with analytics first. And because for every single voter in the state of Iowa, and I can tell you, and you and I did work on a campaign together in 2015 and 16. And you may remember that in that campaign, I remember us sitting in a focus group facility together months, if not, it could have even been a year before the first vote was cast in the caucus. And we had already predicted the number of votes that would be cast. We re-predicted that after Donald Trump came down the golden escalator, and our prediction was 186,500. Ended up being about 187,000. And a lot of people, and I don't think you were one of them, but a lot of people said that I was crazy and I was way off. And
no, I did think you were crazy. We've never had that kind of turnout before. I thought there was no way that many people would show up. Yeah,
it'd been 119 in 2012 or 2008, 124,000, 100 in 2012, and so it was a massive increase. Well, in Iowa in 2024. Right now, we project 216,561 votes to be cast in the caucus, which will break the record that was set in 2016. But that's because the level of interest is so high. And those are, now the way in which we arrive at that number, and it's not a round number, is because we literally score every single potential caucus goer with a 0 to 1 scale, predictive model score that tells us whether or not they're going to participate or not. Now, I can get far deeper into that. I know how many people right now people today are voting for Trump, how many people today are voting for DeSantis, how many people are deciding between the two, how many people would vote for DeSantis if they did turn out and vote. And there's about another 100,000 of those, quite frankly. So you can imagine where my efforts are going in terms of who I'm communicating with and who we're trying to talk to. But those are the aspects that go into it. And whenever I have clients call me and want to do polling, probably 4 out of 5 times, I try and talk them out of doing a survey and into doing predictive analytics. Now, each of those is a different tool, but I would describe survey research and polling as being more like a thermometer. It tells you what the temperature is. It tells you what the numbers are. Mm-hmm. Analytics is like a thermostat. It allows you to make adjustments and to communicate specifically with individuals who are either likely to vote for your candidate or care about the issues your candidate cares about, or maybe disagrees with your opponent whenever they say that a heartbeat bill is a terrible thing. Those sorts of specific applications that are markedly important in races that are like this one that I'm involved in now.
So I am fascinated that you think we're going to hit that turnout mark, because Chris, I will just tell you that the energy on the ground is the least I've ever seen in Iowa at this stage of the race. I have a very politically engaged suburb. I was the precinct captain for Cruz in my own suburb here in 2016. Yeah. Called these homes myself, okay? There are 3 yard signs in my precinct, 1 for Vivek and 2 for DeSantis, and one of them's mine. You drive throughout rural Iowa, I don't see Trump barns and signs blanketing highways. I mean, the on-the-ground level of engagement and energy here visibly is the lowest I've ever seen, and I've been in every caucus since 1996. So square that with what you guys are, with what you think, which is that we are going to have 30-40% more people vote in 2024 than we had in 2016 when we set that record.
That's right. And I'll tell you why I think that's going to happen. And one of it is the models we built out that I have a lot of trust in. Now, we'll continue to rebuild those as we get closer to the election, and it could be adjusted up or down based on the level of enthusiasm that you would probably pick up before I would. But I'll tell you what the Never Back Down PAC has done that I believe is creating some of that enthusiasm, gives me a lot of confidence in our numbers. There are 21 staff in the state of Iowa working for Never Back Down. That's more than anybody outside of Barack Obama since in 2008. 5 offices, 366,544 doors knocked as of Monday. I should have updated before I got on your show. I apologize, but there's probably been about 20,000 more since then. There are right now 13,003 Iowans who have committed to caucus for Ron DeSantis. That is more than Ted Cruz had at this time in 2015. There are DeSantis was the first campaign with 99 county chairs. There are 12 state senators who've endorsed, 27 state legislators, 13 sheriffs, 73 in counting grassroots leaders. Obviously, the most important of those is Steve Deace. And so all those things matter from a standpoint of who's going to turn out and vote. But the other aspect that I think is important to Iowa that I know matters to you is, Iowa is a state, like a lot of states are, that are won, the Republican primary and caucus is won through people of faith. And in Iowa, there are 88,864 evangelicals who are likely to caucus on January 15th. Now, there are 232,864 evangelicals who are registered Republicans. But so your communication isn't just limited to those 88,000. You still communicate with the 232,000, but you know who today is likely to caucus, and that's where your time is better spent. We look at this a lot of different ways, Steve. There's 15,286 likely caucus voters who attend church once a week or more. 139,149 who pray outside of church at least once a week. These are the things that go into the way in which you make a decision. And this is so much more important, I think, than simple polling. Because you can ask people, are you evangelical, or do you go to church, or how often do you pray? But when you know who those people are, that matters from a standpoint of communicating with them and asking them to go vote for a candidate who shares their values and has acted on their beliefs to protect their children, protect their values as governor of the state of Florida. And so those are a lot of the reasons why I believe that the numbers are correct and that turnout will increase. And we've got it increasing everywhere right now, to be honest with you, Steve.
Okay. Couple more questions. Let's talk about public polling. I get up Sunday morning, check the Twitters before I go off to church, and everyone's talking about this ABC poll with Biden up or down by 10 over Trump, and I'm like, there's no way there's internals there for me to look at. I was stunned that there were. And the internal said that Biden was going to win minority voters by 9 points. He won it by 36. That he was going to lose the youth vote by 15. He won it by 19. Okay, I mean, and I'm just like, how does this get published? So let me ask you, Chris, how does that get published?
I don't have a good answer, Steve. That was my first reaction too, and I did the same thing you did. I go look at it, independents, minorities, young voters, African Americans. I mean, it was just, there's no way a reasonable person who has a community college level of understanding of political science would look at that poll and say, yes, this is accurate. And the same day, another poll comes out that had Biden up too. Now, the difference was where they asked the questions. And the ABC poll asked the question, asked the ballot after a series of questions about the economy and whether they supported or opposed Biden on it and unfave toward him. And I think that just ended up impacting those numbers pretty overwhelmingly, because I don't think they did anything to try and nefariously skew the numbers. It's kind of like Harlan's razor is never a tribute to malice, which you can attribute to incompetence. And I think that is what goes on with a lot of these, is just they don't spend a lot of money, they don't pay a lot of attention to the way the questions are asked, and then they put something out without looking at the internals. And that is, I can tell you, Steve, when you do what I do on the political side of things, this is why I get into these debates with media. Oh, well, it's an internal poll, so we're not going to publish it. Like, those are the ones you should be publishing. Because you know what happens to me if I put out a poll that shows somebody up by 10 points and the whole world looks at it and laughs? I get fired. And if I tell somebody they're going to win and they lose, I don't get hired again. And it destroys your reputation overnight. There's a lot of people who used to be in this industry a decade ago who no longer are because they had problems like that. Now, some survive it, to be clear. But it was shocking to me that was put out with a straight face by all modern reflections is a sane and well-respected media organization. And anybody who looked at those internals came with the same attitude you did and I did, and just kind of laughed and shook their head and said, all right, come on. Are you trying to skew things
Is that
here?
a poll or a psyop, basically? All right, I've got a minute. Are there any public pollsters you would tell our audience that you find to be reliable?
Yeah, I think Jan Seltzer there in Iowa is, for the most part, reliable. Now, she was off in 2016. She had Trump winning, whereas our internal numbers had Cruz winning. But I think for the most part, she is reliable. From a standpoint of just consistently good public numbers, what's funny is I would have said ABC News Washington Post up until that survey came out. So now I can't say that anymore without you laughing at me. So I think there are ones that understand states. And, the Des Moines Register poll is a good example of that. There's others that exist like that in states that are important. South Carolina has one, New Hampshire, things like that. The St. Anselm poll in New Hampshire. So it's tough for a national polling organization to just like parachute in and take a look at Iowa and New Hampshire, had they never done so before. And the reason why Seltzer can be so accurate in Iowa is she has so much data that she can build on, having done this for so long, that it makes her better there.
Chris, great stuff, man. Appreciate it. And we'll have you back and maybe get more specific about this particular race. But with the time we had, I wanted to address just kind of fundamentals of the state of polling in particular. So thanks for the time, brother. Good to see you.
I appreciate it, brother. Appreciate you.
You bet. Thank you. So, guys, there's a guy who has worked in this business at a high level. And when I asked him, can you think of a national or a public pollster that you could urge our audience to trust, he struggled to come up with somebody, which is no problem at all when you consider almost all of our news coverage about issues and elections is some riff off of public polling that Chris just told us he largely does not trust. That's nice. We're in a good place with that.
Is this a blessing in disguise? Even when polls were done well, didn't it tell us to not have core convictions and ultimately and just follow the leader? Now that we can't do it well anymore, is it because we kind of got to this point because we followed too many polls instead of core convictions? Didn't we?
That could be it.
I think you need to be following WPA intelligence on
That's
Twitter.
Chris's firm, by the way.
That's his firm.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, the rapidity with which they debunk so many of these just trash psyop polls, I think is worth the follow alone. And sometimes it's within minutes. It's like this poll comes up and it's so easy to debunk. Here's 666 reasons why, this thing is trash. WPA intelligence on Twitter.
Well, I got to tell you, I doubted, Chris, in 2016 that we're going to see that kind of turnout. I'm really doubting it this time because the energy level on the ground is just much lower. But, dude, I will defer to him. That would still only be 31% turnout, though. As big of a number as that is. Only 31% of Iowa Republicans. John 3:17.